Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime Series with me, Kevin Britz, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me today is marketing and leadership segment, marketing and communications expert and co-host Craig Pagely. How are you doing, Craig?
Yeah, Kevin, great to be chatting today. And yeah, thanks for shuffling the recording times around to meet this ridiculous diary that I've been managing since last week. Yeah, so while I was slaving away over the Easter long weekend, what did you get up to?
I managed to just do like stuff around the neighborhood and just be at home predominantly because we have a new puppy as well. So you can't just leave for very long. But yeah, did some work, and besides that, just even went to our local pub. Which I generally don't do. Myself some double brandies and Coke, which was an unusual day for me.
Oh, that's
And
fantastic.
yeah, so we just had we tried to have some like just some fun locally and around here, and we did some fixing of the house and stuff. So yeah, a nice long weekend. Yeah.
Awesome.
So Craig, as we wrap up the CMO themed conversation last week, what do you have in store for us today?
Kevin, that's right. We did wrap up the discussion, which focused on the role and impact of CMOs in the C-suite last week. And as a reminder to our listeners, this was actually over a two-part series, which occurred over 3 weeks, with the 200th show celebration slap bang in the middle of that. But for today's show, though, I actually want to stay with the topic of the C-suite, because this time I want to focus on more how managing stakeholder relations in the C-suite is something that new members to the C-suite really need to know about. And the article we're going to review today is titled Navigating the C-Suite, Managing Stakeholder Relationships. The article was written by Dr. Ajit Kambil, who he is a global advisor, an executive and innovator and an educator. And this particular article was published by Deloitte University Press. And it's worth noting here, Kevin, that Dr. Ajit Kimball was directly involved in creating the Deloitte Executive Transition Lab, which kicked off in 2010. And many of their clients have worked through the Transition Lab. And it's the findings of those interactions that really have informed this particular article.
Yeah,
The article opens, yes.
sorry,
Sorry.
Craig, and I just think it's an interesting, especially managing stakeholder relationships. So it's going to be nice to unpack this conversation.
Yeah, there's really wonderful, simple points that are referenced, and when you lean into those, they're easy to activate and put into your repertoire when you entering in at the C-suite level. So the article opens with the following paragraph. Our research and our work on over 1,000 transition labs to date have validated time, talent, and relationships as the three key resources that all incoming executives have to manage effectively to succeed. Dr. Ajit Kimball notes here that among these three resources, creating and establishing effective stakeholder relationships can sometimes be the most challenging and frustrating for new executives entering the C-suite.
Okay, and I think those 3 points, I mean, that's critical to be able to pay attention to those time, talent, and relationships because a large part of I don't know, I get the impression a lot of the time people take that for granted. But the fact that you understand what time you're spending on doing something and specifically the relationships you build, unbelievably, especially at this level, unbelievably important.
Absolutely. So Dr. Kimball also goes on to note that the unhappiest executives he's ever encountered in any of the transition lab engagements often have a difficult relationship challenge that they must navigate in the C-suite. And it could be one of those three. It could be other organizational challenges. The challenge here is to navigate, the biggest challenge here is to navigate the difficult relationships because these often drain you of mental energy, and in doing so, they really distract the chief operating experience officer. In addition to, sorry, let me just give some context. The entire article is written around a particular role in the C-suite, and this in this instance being the chief experience officer. So a lot of the references are drawn from those thousands of interactions, particularly pertain to the CXO. The challenge here is that difficult relationships often drain mental energy and therefore distract the CXO from the critical tasks. And the biggest negative result here is that it inevitably undermines the effectiveness of the teams related to the CXO. And on that point, Kevin, question for you. How have the executives that you work with in leadership and coaching business responded to the three resources of talent and relationship?
I laugh because when you mention time, it's the frame at which executives normally function is that their time is more precious and more taken up than anyone else's, as if they don't have time. Very often, it's a simple thing. I've mentioned it before. It's like, okay, well, show me your calendar.
Yeah.
It's a simple, easy, reflective moment of going, if you can't manage what it is you're doing with your time effectively, you're not managing your life, right? So when it says mental drainage and the mental energy that it takes, it's, well, there's part of that also you also as the executive in that role have to be absolutely cognizant about, because as much as you want to get things done, and yes, there's deadlines and there's pressures and there's things that need to get absolutely 100%, but there has to be a reflect once that project's ended, once that moment's over. There has to be a reflection to kind of go, okay, cool, how do I weigh this up again? How do I do less in this time, or how do I take time for myself? Because this is why there's such an unbelievable, it's almost like a pandemic, it's an epidemic of the world, that mental health is struggling purely based on the fact people are functioning at this very high level, and it's not like they can't, but they can't do it for 6 months, right? At 6 months, as much as we have this, and there's so many leaders and coaches in the world currently speaking about, why have we normalized the hustling culture to be normal? Why is hustling yourself to death? Why have we made that normal? It's not normal, right? So there's a lot of, especially in an executive and a leadership space, where time is just like, oh, let's not talk about time because I just don't have enough time, right?
No, no, very good point. But then, there are other challenges in this particular aspect, the difficult relationship component. And here we learn that apart from the unfortunate mental drain that you've just spoken about, the reality is new executives don't manage those relationships effectively in the C-suite. And in many instances, the net result is that the CEO will consider replacing you with new executives if the respective executive is not able to entrench a relationship and really embed peer support. And that's a big risk.
Yeah. And I think that's why it becomes it's almost a double-edged sword, because you're required to be at the top of your game. But you're also required to meet that with your time, with your relationships, with having, a great team, high performance. It becomes a very, very tricky situation to be in if you're not actively knowing what it is you're doing with your time and your energy and how to function at that pace. Somewhere something's gonna lack, and something's gonna, take a knock.
Yeah, I like your reference to knowing what you're doing with your time. That's a really critical. So, Kevin, jumping into some of the key relationships that executives have to manage in the C-suite, at the minimum, they have to manage relationships with CEOs. Then the next expected, probably most important relationship is that of the chief financial officer. And, staying in the financial realm, when you're in a larger board construct, that of the audit chair. Going back to last week's relationship, at least conversation, relationships with the chief marketing officer is vital, with the chief human resource officer, chief technology and information officer, and even the chief data officer, sales director, and then in this particular instance, the chief experience officer, all are necessary in managing effectively. And then you've got the board, and then your suite of peer executives, and then finally staff members, all multiple layers of managing relationships effectively entrenched at the C-suite. You'd be able to cascade that through the organization quite seamlessly, Kevin. The key highlight here, though, is, again, that if new execs are not able to allocate sufficient time to build those relationships and entrench those at least within the first 6 months of their tenure, it will come back to haunt them because they will inevitably need peer support from their fellow stakeholders when trying to launch or drive those new initiatives that they've been tasked with.
Craig, but what I do find interesting about people are, and I'm making a generalization, and there are some stats for the idea that people are, people in very high positions, specifically CEOs, for example, of that sector of, an industry, the percentage chance of narcissistic behavior to be part of a CEO's characteristics is quite high.
Yes.
Alarming. So, at this level, you part of, and that's the interesting part for me is you move into, okay, cool. What is the ego? How is the ego at play here? Because as much as, you have to get relationships going, and there's also an ego that's sort of driving, well, I'm the man, and, I get to schmooze and go to the meetings and make everything, I'm the go-to, right? So and then when someone's really done this at an unhealthy level for long enough, they're invariably on some kind of medication or burnt out. And then they need to kind of have an intervention with, because their egos got in the way of what they actually do. So it becomes a very interesting thing where you see people at an unhealthy level and how their egos are completely out of whack. And that's very, and again, I'm making generalization, but very often you find that in large corporate, big corp, uh, people just don't like the executives because they walk around with egos, a lot of the
And
time.
and and Kevin, that really is the point that it makes you in terms of it's going to bite you because you're going to need their support when trying to launch and drive those the new initiatives. But if ego is being your mandate, you're not going to get that support. That's a reality.
No, and you think of high performing teams. High performing teams need to rely. Well, you need to rely on people for that to even exist. And if you're walking around with the ego because you're the man and you're the this and this, and you don't really make time, and it's inflated, everyone sees that. Right. So there's an element that when you hold a powerful position like this, that it comes with a huge amount of human responsibility.
Yes.
The humans that you work with, the people that are connected to you, are going to directly influence whether you're succeeding or not. Right. Craig, you referenced peer executives. Tell us about peer executives.
Yes, thank you. It's a really important piece to focus on. Key executives are generally described as top-level executives from non-competing companies. Evan, they meet on a regular basis to share their experiences, to discuss industry trends, and to offer each other support and advice. And not necessarily just in terms of the sector and work experience, but definitely moving into the mental capacity and emotional support as well. And there's a collective of these individuals who are known as peer group CEO roundtables or CEO forums. And it's wonderful to see that there are different constructs of this and that CEOs in particular facing the biggest challenge at the C-suite do have other channels of engagement and ability to gain secondary and external support here, Kevin. These particular groups are sought after relationships for looking to improve their leadership skills and gain valuable insights from peers. And we often hear about a successful CEO referencing their participation in a peer group as a key factor in their personal growth and development. And this is something that I've really gone to look at and uncover a bit here.
Yeah, and Craig, as you're speaking about peer executives, I must tell you a quick story.
Yes.
I've been in a roundtable discussion where we actually brought CEOs and executives together, and one of the CEOs, and specifically we were speaking about how do we solve and issues, and everyone brought a issue to a table. And I'd specifically said to the CEO, you need active coaching in your environment, external coaches that are not part of your business so that they look in and help you guys perform. And he was dogmatic about that and saying people should do their own thing. And, if they need coaches, they should do it themselves. And in the peer discussion, another random CEO from a realty company, really successful realty company, said, well, I think you need coaching. And he went back to coaching. In that environment, the arrogance of this one CEO was just like, He knows best because he runs a large insurance company and then when you come back and you look at where these peer discussions happen,
Yeah.
you actually realize that there's so much ego happening in that room. And it's just as you were speaking about that peer discussion groups, and to this day, this very CEO just follows his own narrative. He get him to do anything is just it's his way or the highway kind of thing. But I mean,
Not healthy.
not healthy at all. But can you list some examples of such CEOs that you're referring to?
Oh, absolutely, Kevin. And yeah, I was quite surprised when I came across the respective article that I reviewed in light of this particular proposition. Firstly, the article is titled Five Famous CEOs Who Benefited from Peer Groups. And this article was published on peernacle.com. And here we learn that the following five CEOs have credited their participation in peer groups as, take note, a key factor in their professional development and growth. And this is something that the particular CEO that you allude to really needs to be cognizant of, because it is important to have conversations outside of your ego. So the first here is actually Mark Zuckerberg, who's founder, chairman, and CEO of Meta. Mark Zuckerberg's a member of the Alliance of CEOs. This is a group of high-profile executives who meet regularly to discuss business and leadership strategies. And Mark Zuckerberg has credited the group with providing valuable insights into the tech industry and to helping navigate challenges of running a large, fast-growing company. And the source here is from Forbes, Mark Zuckerberg's secret weapon, a peer group of CEOs. Second, I think this supported that really surprised me the most is actually Oprah Winfrey. She's the founder and CEO of Harpo Productions. Oprah Winfrey is a member of the CEO peer group titled CEO Academy. It's a group composed of successful women CEOs who meet regularly to discuss business strategies, share their experiences, and offer support to each other. And Oprah Winfrey has credited this group with helping her develop her leadership skills and gain valuable insights into the media industry. So quite a specific, focused construct there. The source here is Harvard Business Review, The Power of Peer Influence. And already you can see just on these two references there are critical writings about the power and benefits of peer groups.
Well, I mean, and that this is what I've taken away from it. I haven't had many of these, but a few of these kind of groups where I've been fortunate to sit in and listen and speak to. But you see you see how business is done from that perspective, from that industry, and usually the framing that happens from someone else's version of how an industry could be impacted. Um, yeah, so I can only imagine, in these academies and these organizations, how much brain power, because essentially everyone's there to share and to highlight and to collaborate in some way of collaborate in thinking and also critical thinking, what that next future would be. So I think it would be a fantastic just to have like a peek into them to figure out what they.
Kevin, the third on the list is Jack Welch. Probably not a surprise because I would see so many actually leaning into Jack as a peer mentor and guide. Um, Former CEO of General Electric. Jack Welch is a member of the CEO Forum, which was a group of top-level execs who meet to discuss business and leadership strategies primarily. Jack Welch has credited the group with providing valuable insights into the business world and helping him navigate the challenge of running large multinational organization. The source is inc.com, 5 ways CEO peer groups can help you scale your business. The fourth on the list is Jeff Immelt, also a former CEO of General Electric. Jeff Immelt is known for being part of the CEO roundtable, so interesting sitting in a different CEO construct to that of Jack Welch. This is a group of CEOs of large companies who meet regularly at least to share their experience, discuss industry trends, and offer support to each other. And Jeff Immelt has credited the group with helping him navigate the challenge of running large multinational companies, but he's also gained valuable insights into different industries, of which obviously General Electric serves across multiple industry sectors. And the source here is Harvard Business Review, The Power of Peer Influence. And the fifth and final on the list here, Kevin, is one of my heroes, that being Richard Branson, who's the founder and CEO of the Virgin Group. Richard Branson is a member of the peer group titled The Elders. This group is composed of successful business leaders who meet regularly to discuss business strategies, share experiences and offer support to one another. Richard Branson has credited this particular group with providing valuable insights into the business world and help him navigate the challenge of running a very diverse group of companies, as you well know, starting in the music world through to running airlines and space expeditions. And the source here is Forbes, Richard Branson, The Power of Peer Support. So as you can see, 5 leading CEOs around the world have put the ego behind them, and they've led into groups where they can contribute and gain value from those collective discussions.
But I think I've heard Richard Branson in an interview accredit someone ask him, what do you accredit your success to? And he often says, "Well, I'm not the clever one. I just employ really clever people." Right? So he surrounds his peer group with people who know more in a certain area than he does. So it's always when you hear, and he's quite soft spoken and quite humble in his demeanor. So when you hear it, I can only imagine what those kinds of conversations would be when you're sitting in a room with Richard Branson and the peer group
Absolutely.
he's involved.
Absolutely. He's
Amazing.
actually running a program on Necker Island of CEO peer groups where they just escape the real world and they head out to the island and they spend 4 or 5 days just immersed in shaping the future. It's just phenomenal. But Kevin, I just want to go back to the original article again here. Again, just to quickly reference it, Navigating the C-Suite, Managing Stakeholder Relationships, and published, or at least written by Dr. Ajit Kambil. Here he notes that the research and work on the transition labs has brought about 4 key areas in transition that can go a long way in establishing relationships and avoiding those pitfalls that we mentioned. And these particular guiding principles include the likes of determining which stakeholders are critical early and then scheduling face-to-face time with them, knowing what the critical stakeholders actually want, and more importantly, what they don't want, adapting your communication style to the context and personalities of the individual stakeholders you want to relate to. Very important point. And finally, connecting where the key conversations occur. And you've got to be really adept in your management style to be able to understand where the key conversations occur.
Yeah, okay. One of the things, and I think it's part of that critical skill we've spoken about, even in the wings. Understanding how critical thinking and creativity can lead conversations and are leading conversations. I was watching yesterday what the World Economic Forum has now listed as the core competency skills for the future of work for between now and 2030. And creativity and critical thinking is at the forefront of what the world is actively seeking. And one of them is resilience and motivation. And you're going, really? This is the core competencies of the world. So when you see it, reiterated, managing stakeholder relationships. Part of that managing is also having really good conversations. And it comes back to, depending on the quality of the questions, is the quality of your conversation. If you consider how to manage those stakeholder relationships even better, and if you're doing it better and using it strategically, so it's adding to your creativity and your critical thinking, that's a beautiful long-term kind of strategy for really getting to where you're going, especially with
Absolutely.
issues you have like that. Yeah.
So mentioning the 4 guiding principles, I think, yeah, what I did want to do is just focus on 2 that really stood out for me, Kevin. And the first there is knowing what critical stakeholders want and don't want, and communication being core to my existence in my career, adapting communication styles to the context and personalities of the individual stakeholders you want to relate to. And again, just the feedback out of the article is relating to the chief experience officer in this particular instance. So let's look at the first of those principles, knowing what critical stakeholders want and don't want in a bit more detail. So to better know what the key stakeholders want, the CXOs should consider walking in the stakeholders' shoes. And I love this particular reference. If you can walk in the shoes of the individuals you want to engage with, you'll understand what their journey is as well. And then it's about hypothesizing what those key stakeholders want or want of you as the new executive in the team. And some of the most common ones that Dr. Kimball referenced out of those thousands of sessions is understanding how businesses work. In particular, for executives coming from outside organizations, The C-suite wants to see an overview of how that CXO reaches out to the peer business operators and learns the nuances of the various businesses and how they make money. So it's about the expectation of reaching outside of your realm and bringing fresh new thinking into the conversation, Kevin. It's about establishing good working relationships with your peers. CEOs want to see how the new CXO actually works to establish those trusted relationships with him and him, her, or their particular peers. It's about bringing focused solutions, not just a problem. You and I have had this chat many, many times. Don't bring problems to the table. Bring a solution that helps you define what your problem is. Often CEOs note that they want the new CXO to separate the forest from the trees and, most importantly, think through solution alternatives when raising a problem. It's about recruiting and managing a strong team. Very important. It helps improve the capabilities of the company and obviously create stability. It's about good stewards of their function. And I like the steward particular reference. Make sure the basics of the responsibilities are well taken care of. And because of that, commitments can and will be met. It's about partnerships on strategy and change, probably the most important aspect. So when you talk about the World Economic Forum pillars that you just referenced, resilience, yeah, plug straight into being capable in strategy and change, the ability to translate change agenda of the CEO into actionable steps, and then how you are able to take that and inform strategy, Kevin. And finally, great word of confidence, the ability to confidently challenge being a very strong word in this instance, but you bring different perspectives to the discussion. The chief operating experience will challenge the CEO, but they may want to have private discussions on areas of difference and concern outside of the forum and outside of the particular peer.
Just on that, bring focus solutions, not just problems. I'm just thinking now. I, and you can see it in different. It's almost like at this level, at any kind of chief level officer level, there's an unspoken expectation that you simply do not bring the problem to the table. And and it's just an idea like that, like an unspoken rule. Because if you're not coming there with absolute conviction on how this is the problem, but here's my solution. And I remember, just recently in the last couple of months, having one phone call with the head of marketing from F&B about a potential idea, just one conversation. And a few months later, it's actually, turning into an actual thing. Like we've pitched stuff to F&B, their head of their leadership, their learning and development teams. They literally pitched to them. And I had one conversation with the chief marketing officer for F&B. So when you sit at that level, and I've done this with other C-suite executives, and there's just always this they have just a different take on it, right? But if you look at certain people who hold this position, right there, they see things as, okay, what is the potential possibility here? And I think it's part of holding a position at such a high level. What is the pure potential possibility? And if you can't tap into pure potential possibility, you're just going to see everything as a problem, right? Everything you've just mentioned, I think it ties back into that. What is the caliber of your thinking at this level? Because that's so important for you to be able to hold this position.
Correct. Correct.
Do we have another question? Sorry, Craig. I'm just
Yeah. So it's in terms of the second guiding principle that I want to address, Kevin, here is that of adapting communication styles to the context and the personalities of the individual stakeholders that you want to relate to. And here, Dr. Kambil notes that they have to co-develop. And this is just such a powerful word, and a word that I'm hearing more and more and more frequently. Co-develop a typology of the business personalities rooted in the work of Dr. Helen Fisher, a well-known author and research professor in the Department of Anthropology at Rutgers. So the ability to take all of the learnings plus Dr. Helen Fisher's research findings, and they've co-developed this platform, which is called the Business Chemistry Typography, at least typology, and it's quite a mouthful that. And this particular model focuses on effective interactions between its four key types, noting that a person could be, and inevitably is at times, more types than one type, either dominant in secondary and tertiary in others. And this is a principle that you're probably familiar with in terms of dominance as a principle or secondary um, focus areas. So what's really interesting about this, Kevin, is it was translated into business personalities, and there's a really great chart in the article that is configured around four vertical columns, these being at least four columns. On the horizontal axis, it talks about type, characteristics, things that tick them off and ways to engage. And then on the vertical axis, it talks about driver, pioneer, greater, and guardian, and this being the archetypes of the individuals. And when you look at the business personalities in the archetype reference, you'll know what their characteristics are, where their sort of weak points are, and then how to engage in conversation with them. So, yeah, for instance, looking at the archetype of driver, the type in this particular instance is about they like logic and deep examination of systems. So you've got to understand that construct. Then their characteristics are about being determined, direct, analytical, pragmatic, aggressive, and they tend to focus on goals over the feelings of others. So caution sign there. Things that tick them off is small talk, waiting, indecisiveness, self-put downs. But the ways to engage is really important. It's about be brief, get to the point, be logical, be clear and unemotional, and recognize their achievements and leadership capabilities. So just a very simple construct in how to become familiar with engaging with the respective, how to engage and communicate with the respective players in the C-suite. I like the prospect of the integrator. The integrator, from a type definition, it likes to connect on a personal level and figure out how the pieces fit together. At a characteristic level, the integrator is a big picture thinker, intuitive, supportive, empathetic, and a consensus builder, great team player. At a thing that tick them off level, the integrator about confrontation, aloofness, interruptions, and aggressiveness. Don't act in that particular way. The way to engage with the integrator is about listening actively. It's about being friendly and authentic, and personal. It's about thinking contextual and long term, and offering support and talking about people. And when we spoke about the peer groups earlier, I thought that the integrator fitted quite nicely into a really important person to have in a peer group construct, because this is about the collective, about the sharing, about the big picture visioning, Kevin. And I think the key takeout for me of the particular guiding principle framework that they talk about is that the awareness of personality will definitely help C-suite executive members modify how they communicate to be better heard and better understood by the respective stakeholders.
Yeah. Craig, and I think what's interesting about, just looking at the four types here and the characteristics, um, and being involved with what I do and often working in a leadership capacity, is it's a very slippery slope to kind of box people and kind of go, this is who you are, because when you really start unpacking, people in leadership positions, depending on the context of the scenario, depending on what is happening, depending on their mood, there's so many facets and layers, and such a dynamic kind of layered examples and characteristics we tap into as humans, that it's very difficult to because as you speak, like driver, for me, like that's, and the reason why I know that for me is that it's a go-to is because I don't like doing small talk. Like, I don't want to know who your mother is. Like, it's just like, oh, how's your mother? How's your aunt? How's your brother? Like, I don't care. Right. And it comes across quite blunt, but to me, it's like, let's take action. Let's get to the point. But with that said, the pioneer likes variety and possibilities with boundaries and energy to pursue them. part of my personality, depending on the context of the scenario and the situation we're in, my whole kind of approach leads to pioneer. So depending on the context and the scenario and the situation, it's very uniquely on its own, but it's a go-to. It can be a go-to for how to deal with that kind of characteristic in that
Yes,
moment.
yes, absolutely. So, Kevin, there are sort of three takeouts at the end of the article that are definitely worth noting here. Firstly, is incoming executives really have to establish effective stakeholder relationships, and this definitely demands considerable time in the transition. Not investing in the relationships early will undermine future success, and determining, prioritizing, and scheduling what they call a listening tour with key stakeholders early will definitely help start entrenching those relationships. Discovering what they want and don't want, and awareness of the personality types definitely can shape more effective communications with your respective stakeholders. And finally, making time and connecting with stakeholders in venues that may not be work venues. I spoke frequently about, outside of the environments of work. This is where critical conversations can occur, and it's important to effectively connect and engage with stakeholders and build effective relationships in those neutral spaces, Kevin. And that's it from my side today.
Fantastic. Such a nice, rich conversation about the C-suite environment. And yeah, and I think there's such interesting, and specifically, the driver, the pioneer, the integrator and guardian characteristics and how that plays into it, but also some of the awareness, Craig. I think, just of like the time, the relationships, managing all these things that are actually going to impact your environment on a regular basis. I love that. Craigie, so to give us our quote for today, I saw Reed Hastings, who's the co-founder of Netflix, Clint,
Yes.
unapologetically sharp, says, "Do not tolerate brilliant jerks. The cost to teamwork is too high." And I think that's one of the points we kind of alluded to.
Fantastic.
Like it's great that you have knowledge and everything, but if you're just a jerk, if your ego is just in the way of everything, it's difficult to work with people like that. It's not fun.
Not a great contributor to a peer group, I'd say.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Great. Thank you for sharing the insights and for giving us some more insights on this conversation. Please remember to like and share and tune into the Lunchtime Series every Wednesday and Thursday for myself, Craig. And yeah, have a fantastic week, Craig. I'll chat to you soon.